Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 444 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by the man himself, John Paulson. And Paulson, we are post-draft. How is everything going for you?
It's going pretty well. I'm at the start of my projections process, so getting the ball rolling on the 2023 projections, and interested to talk some rookies with you today.
And there is a lot to talk about, so I want to jump right into it at the top of the show. But before we begin, a quick reminder, our player profiles, my draft grades, your rookie fallouts for fantasy for free on the site for everyone, 444.com right now. Also, you and I have a permanent schedule now for everyone. We will be back every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern if anyone is inclined to join us at that time. We'll also be waiting in the most accurate podcast feed, but if you want to jump in and join us live on YouTube, then feel free to do it. And that's because we also have now a YouTube membership plan for everyone here at 444. And by becoming a member, you can get loyalty badges. You can get exclusive emojis, including one of my bald head, if you want to copy and paste that around to your friends for whatever the hell reason you'd like to do. Priority reply to your comments. If you have questions, we will certainly get to them if you are a member. And then, of course, promo codes if you want to wear the 444 gear around, which I do all the time. I have this shirt on right now, not only because I'm obviously accompanying him, because also it's just very comfortable. And I support any dry fit or very good t-shirt material anytime a company sends it to me. So all of that for less than $2 per month if you want to check that out. So let's jump into it, Paulson. And I want to begin with the Falcons, who, from a team building standpoint, failed in adding another running back, a first-round running back in particular, after getting 1,000 yards from a fifth-round rookie. No capital there, basically. And then, of course, Cordarrelle Patterson, a 32-year-old veteran on a one-year deal, led next-gen stats' rushing yards over expected percentage, literally gaining more than average of the typical NFL running back in every identical situation 50% of the time. He was super efficient. And then, of course, they add Bijan God at number 8 overall. So your thoughts and where you have Bijan Robinson ranked moving forward for redraft purposes?
Well, everything I say today is don't hold me to it, because the 2023 projections are not yet released, but he certainly feels like a top 10, top 8 type back in this offense. I don't think that Tyler Algier will have much of a role. Cordarrelle Patterson probably will take a major back seat this year. He's getting older, but as you mentioned, he was pretty efficient last year. Maybe not the right NFL decision to draft him, but it's a good landing spot for Robinson, and he should be a bell cow. You don't use this type of capital on a running back and not use them. I think there's a stat last six. And since 2010, there's been 6 running backs drafted in the top 10. Those players averaged 296 touches in their rookie season. So I think you're going to see Robinson with a big workload in year 1, and the rest of these guys are just going to take a back seat.
Robinson, of course, the current 101 in both one quarterback and super flex dynasty leagues. And I know you may look on the surface at his reception total in Texas, but just remember, this guy can still very much be one of, if not the biggest factor in the passing game among running backs for the Falcons too. Not only the 4th most yards per target, 10.4 of any player, not just running backs. 10.4 yards per target is the 4th most of any player in this class. Also the 5th most red zone target since 2021 in the FBS among running backs at his position. Absolutely insane what this guy can do. So yes, be excited for Bijan in those dynasty drafts and redraft situations. The Panthers also addressed a dire need in adding Bryce Young and Jonathan Mingo. So now that we have Young locked into this offense that not only entails Mingo, but also Adam Thielen, Miles Sanders, Hayden Hurst, DJ Chark, what are your thoughts on Young's situation in redrafts?
It's not too bad. I mean, they added Mingo. He's an interesting dude. He's not your typical looking wide receiver. He looks more like a running back. 4.46 speed, 226 pounds. So he's built like a bigger Deebo Samuel. So this is a good outlet for Bryce Young, and now this receiving core is kind of coming together. They do have a little bit of talent. DJ Shark, I'm a little more excited about him than Adam Thielen. Terrace Marshall, took a step forward last year. It wasn't a huge step forward, but he had a very, very, very disappointing rookie season. Did a little bit better last year. And then Laviska Shenault, has his fans in the fantasy industry, you could say, and maybe they get something out of him. So it's it's not one of the best receiving cores, by a long shot, but it's certainly getting closer to, middling, mediocre set of weapons for him. And that's not too bad as a rookie to have that sort of receiving core. So Mingo, I did put in as one of these 3 players outside the first round that's likely to make an immediate fantasy impact, because I think he does have a chance to end up with the most targets in that offense if things go really well for him this summer.
Our own Justin Edwards is running a Superflex rookie draft 3 rounds behind the scene right now, and we'll be covering that for everyone at 4for4.com. I believe it will be free for everyone to read too. And I only say that because Mingo was available when I was on the clock at 2:07 in that draft, and I could not have been more excited, especially in a rookie startup like that, because yes, he did not have the production in college. Never reached 900 receiving yards across 4 collegiate years, averaged 3.2 receptions per game in that span. But they took a chance on him because of his athleticism and early round capital. Not only the first wide receiver to be drafted on day 2 this year, but also a 4.46 40. Wrap your head around this, Paulson. 4.46 at 220 pounds. Absolutely insane. And the way Frank Reich talked about him in his post-combine presser, I do want to be a little bit tepid with my expectations, because Reich also mentioned Shark will run every single route the moment he's there. That got us excited. He said practically the same thing about Mingo, that they're going to use him all over, particularly underneath. But that kind of speed, that kind of strength, and recording the Power Five's 6th most receiving yards after contact for his career, like that tells you that if he is used underneath, he has all these traits you want to target, especially for the target in that safety valve area of the number 1 overall pick. So I do get excited about Mingo as a mid-second round selection in rookie drafts. The biggest fallout, though, the one that got everyone talking, was the Lions. Number 6 overall, their guy, Devon Witherspoon, who I'm convinced, like a fantasy manager, when they get sniped and then are suddenly doing extra work because they did not prepare for option B, I believe they wanted Devon Witherspoon, the Lions, and once he wasn't there because the Seahawks pulled the rug out from everyone, they were left scrambling, and then made the right move and trading back and getting the number 12, number 18, and picking up another day 2 pick, but then added Jahmyr Gibbs, the second running back off the board at number 12 overall behind Bijan Robinson. So your thoughts on Jahmyr Gibbs now with David Montgomery, because post DeAndre Swift trade, and I'll ask you about that in a second, this Lions offense now has the most available carries missing from last year, the most running back touches missing from last year, and then most important of all, literally 100% of their carries from inside the 5-yard line up for grabs from last year.
Yeah, this was quite the buzz on draft night. I remember shaking my head at that pick based on the personnel that they had, and we kind of thought that signaled DeAndre Swift would be moving on, and it happened pretty quickly. The Eagles plucked him away for, what was it, a 4th round pick or a 5th round pick?
5th round pick, and because they're the Eagles at Howie Roseman, if Swift leaves this year, they get a compensatory pick next year. So they basically lose nothing. Yeah, very smart.
So good for the Eagles. Good for Swift to get a fresh start in Philly. But you asked about the Lions, and I think, if they're going to use this type of capital on Gibbs, they did give David Montgomery a pretty sizable role. So I think, or a sizable contract. So I think he'll have a big role. He could be the Jamal Williams in this offense this year, and that could lead to a lot of touchdowns for him. But Gibbs, I think what they wanted to do with Swift is give him, 12 to 15 touches, 4 or 5 catches as part of that. But Swift just couldn't stay healthy enough to stay on the field last year, and they just sort of gave up on him, because I don't think that the talent differential here between Gibbs and Swift is worth all of what they did to make this upgrade in their minds. So I do think PPR formats, Gibbs will be heavily used as a receiver, so he'll have a lot of value there. I don't see him getting more touches than Montgomery, though. I don't know how you feel about it, but it seems to me like this is going to be a 1A, 1B. But Gibbs will have plenty of value in PPR, half PPR formats.
I do not see him out touching Montgomery overall, but also I don't want to think Montgomery is this major roadblock for a running back with number 12 overall capital, especially in May when we're drafting in these large field tournaments on FFPC and Underdog. So I'm still taking a chance. And Underdog, as we know, is half PPR. On FFPC, where it's full PPR, that's where you target Jahmyr Gibbs as a cheat code, basically, because all it takes is one thing to happen. And then suddenly you have someone we'll probably consider to be a top 3, top 4 running back easily suddenly for the Lions. So that's how I'm targeting right now. I know you're still doing projections, but honestly, I'd be shocked if anyone other than Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler are projected with more receptions at running back whenever you get done in the cave. For DeAndre Swift, though, in Philadelphia, what are your early thoughts on Rashad Penny, Swift being added to this mix? And then, of course, it's odd because Kenneth Gainwell was the receiving back. I would imagine he takes a little bit of a back seat now.
Yeah, I just pulled up Underdog ADP just to see where guys are going. Bijan's going RB2. Gibbs is going RB15. So I just thought that was interesting data to add. This is going to be a little bit tricky to project this Philly backfield because both of these guys have had a lot of injury issues. So I have to figure out how many games I can expect each of them to play. And then on top of it, you have Gainwell, who's pretty good in his role, and they're not going to just go away from him. And Boston Scott, who traditionally, vultures a few carries here and there. So Penny has been excellent when he's been available, but he has not been available, consistently. And right. I would say Swift you could probably say the same thing about Swift. He's been maybe a little bit more healthy than Penny, but they both have their issues. So I think these are players that when they are healthy and active, you're probably going to be able to start both. However, this is the Eagles are tricky because Jalen Hurts vultures so many rushing touchdowns. So they haven't used the running backs as pass catchers. And when they do, it's typically Gainwell so far. Sanders did a little bit, but not very much. So you're kind of looking at these two potentially splitting carries and just a handful of catches. So they're going to be, RB2 flex types, I think, when both are healthy. But if one's out, then I think, the other one will graduate to starter.
I know you have been aching to talk about what the Packers did in the draft because, of course, they didn't add a first-round wide receiver. And you have yet to do so since 2002 in Javon Walker. But they came away from day 2 with Jayden Reed at wide receiver and 2 tight ends and Luke Musgrave, a freak who just wasn't healthy, honestly, in college, and Tucker Kraft, who Greg Cosell comped to Dallas Goedert. And yes, they have the low-hanging fruit connection of being Jackrabbits and FCS, but nonetheless, Tucker Kraft is still successful as a 20-year-old in college. But for Reed and Christian Watson, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this fallout for Jordan Love because someone who I trust in the industry, Alex Dunlap at Ruster Watch, he actually compared Reed to Antonio Brown. I've been at the top. I've been at 201 in a few dynasty drafts, rookie drafts, and they're exciting this year because it's all subjective. Like, never are these rankings at the end of first round and the second round intact. They are subjective for every single person in these drafts. And I think Reed is an early second round pick, if not into first round, given his opportunity in this target tree. But your thoughts on the Packers offense now?
Yeah, I wrote up all the first round picks and then because most of them are gonna be able to play right away and make a fast impact, even though they may not. These receivers didn't land in great spots. The 4 first round receivers, Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, and Jordan Addison, none of them jump out to me as surefire wide receiver 2s on their own team or surefire number 2 in terms of targets. You could make the case that Addison will be the number 2 receiver, but he may be behind and probably will be behind Hockenson and Justin Jefferson in targets. So when I was writing up the fantasy impact players drafted outside the first round, Jayden Reed really jumped out as a player that has a lot of potential given the receiver room with Green Bay. I mean, Christian Watson had some great moments last year and looks like he's going to be the breakout wide receiver 1 for the Packers. But after that, Romeo Dobbs was probably the second best receiver last year. I mean, obviously Allen Lazard has moved on. So we were penciling in Dobbs as the wide receiver 2, but I think you certainly could argue that Reed is a better receiver right now than Dobbs. So we'll see how that pecking order sort of shakes out, who they're playing in 2 receiver sets. And if Jayden Reed can hit the ground running this summer, he could be the number 2 option in this offense really quickly, because there isn't a lot of, it's great that they use draft capital on tight ends, but rookie tight ends don't typically have a big impact in terms of targets. So I think that the number 2 role in the offense is up for grabs. And that could lead to a pretty big season for Jayden Reed if Jordan Love is the real deal. So if he doesn't fall flat on his face and there's 3,800 passing yards and 20-something touchdowns up for grabs, then Reed could have a very good year.
Their divisional foe, the Vikings, had many needs to address, in particular on defense, but still came away with USC product Jordan Addison across from Justin Jefferson now after the team lost Adam Thielen to Carolina. So your early thoughts on Addison and where you have Justin Jefferson ranked. To me, he is still number 1 overall. He is still the number 1 wide receiver. You think that his career cannot get any better after last season's Offensive Player of the Year award. But remember, Jefferson caught 3 of 18 end zone targets last year. There is much more meat on this bone, and it's going to be exciting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jefferson's a really safe pick, wide receiver 1 overall, in all likelihood when rankings get released. I think that's what there he was at for the Never Too Early rankings. Really safe pick because of his rapport with Kirk Cousins, and Cousins is back. And I do think that TJ Hawkinson is the number 2 option. He had 9.4 targets per game, 85 targets in 9 games after the trade. So he's my number 3 tight end, fantasy wise, at least in the Never Too Early rankings. So then I think, Addison kind of will replace that Thielen role, and Thielen saw about 100 targets last year. And I think that's possible for Addison. I think we talked about KJ Osborne during the draft and how I was high on him until this Addison pick, as a potential breakout. But he's probably going to be the 3rd receiver, 4th option in the offense, and Addison likely in that number 2 role. And, with 100 targets, you can get there fantasy wise, especially if it's PPR, you can get there, but it's not the type of breakout. Just looking at these 4 receivers drafted in the first round, I don't see a breakout star in year 1, given the where they landed. Each of them are landing in the number 2 or 3 spots in their offenses.
You mentioned Addison taking on Adam Thielen's role, and that's where I get a little excited when you mention that, because remember, Addison was the nation's 2021 Biletnikoff winner for being the best receiver in college in that year under Pittsburgh, because that's when he was a slot receiver. He ran 69% of his routes from the slot that year and had 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns. Whereas then he transferred to USC under Lincoln Riley and ran only 19% of his routes from the slot, became a boundary receiver for whatever reason. So if we think that Addison will land in the slot in place of Thielen, that is even better for his fantasy outlook moving forward. For the Saints, though, it's a small one, yes, and adding Kendre Miller, who I do like, who I was drafting in the last couple of rounds in every big board draft, given that Miller didn't test due to his late injury in the year for TCU. So we thought, given his production and averaging 6.7 yards per carry for his career in college, also he averaged a touchdown for every 13 carries for that 2022 championship game appearing TCU offense. We thought, okay, at 5'11", 215, he's still going to get lost in the shuffle here, given that he didn't participate in the combine for injury. But Miller adds a logjam here between Jamal Williams and Alvin Kamara, who were still waiting on his suspension news. So your early thoughts on the Saints backfield?
Yeah, I mean, I think Miller will have value as long as Kamara is out. But if Kamara is available, then he and Jamal Williams will carry the load in this backfield. I don't think there'll be room for a 3rd fantasy viable running back. But I mean, that doesn't mean that he won't have his weeks if especially if Kamara is suspended for 6 or 8 games, then they'll need him. And then Jamal Williams will also get an uptick in his touches. So I just think that you're looking at the season as a whole. What are they going to do when everybody's healthy? And I don't think that there's many weekly touches for him from the get-go. But again, if one or both of those guys are out, then he's got some upside.
The Giants also added a logjam to their receivers room because Jalin Hyatt, who had first-round grades, did fall to the 3rd round. And it's interesting, Paulson, because we know the Giants basically only signed slot receivers this offseason. And now here comes Hyatt, who had an 89% career slot rate with Tennessee. Also, I don't know if you're aware, but Hyatt was basically no one. Like, he totaled 500 yards and 4 touchdowns totaled through his first 2 seasons with the Volunteers. And then only when Cedric Tillman, the number 74 overall pick in this draft to the Browns, we'll get to him in a bit, only when Tillman got injured last year did Hyatt then break out as last year's Blitnikoff Award winner with 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. Just an explosive boundary guy. At least that's what he's saying he is at the next level, because he's now also playing at 188, 190, which comps him to Will Fuller at 6 foot, honestly, if he can maintain that 4.4 40 speed. So what are you doing with this Giants wide receivers room now? And is it a long-winded way of saying draft Darren Waller?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the depth chart, and
they're all the same guy.
It's kind of comical now. I mean, the guy I was most excited about heading into this year, he wasn't even. It was funny because I was reading the ESPN blurb about Jalin Hyatt, and they were talking about the fantasy implications, and then even mentioned Isaiah Hodgins, but he was the one that had the best stretch run last year, along with Darius Slayton had some good games as well. It was kind of those two, with everybody else basically injured, and then the guy that went to KC, Richie James. So who they're replacing with 9 different guys. Paris Campbell's got a lot of speed. Sterling Shepard is a quality route runner, but is he going to be healthy for the start of the season? Same question for Wan'Dale Robinson, who flashed a little bit last year prior to his injury. For some reason, they added Jamison Crowder as well. So this is I could see a lot of these guys rotating through the rankings as we get these little tidbits of information about who's playing well in camp, because we don't know exactly who's even going to make the roster based on all the same type of players they have, same prototype of players. So Darren Waller, certainly, if healthy, is the safest bet. I think Slayton's skill set probably sets him apart from a lot of these other guys. Hyatt's interesting, although he didn't grade real well as a route runner over at Reception Perception. Matt Harmon wasn't real keen on his how NFL ready he is as a route runner. So when I look at trying to project these rookies that way, and I see that Harmon is down on them, it's tough for me to really rank him very high, because the guys that come in and really tear it up tend to, the Chris Olaves, the Garrett Wilsons, they tend to be really good route runners coming out of college, and I don't think Hyatt falls into that category. So all that said, we've got kind of a log jam, and I think Hodgins and Slayton probably start with Paris Campbell if Shepard and Robinson are still sidelined, and then Hyatt's trying to get snaps over one of those guys.
Speaking of wide receivers, universally the number 1 on the board went to the Seahawks, who I did give an A in my draft grades for free on the site for everyone, both AFC and NFC, parsed in 2 separate columns. But Jaxon Smith-Njigba lands with Seattle at number 20 overall. And yes, we haven't seen Njigba play for basically a year, since he only played 60 snaps with an injury in 2022. But last we saw in 2021, literally 4 yards per route run next to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're pretty good. So now we have Njigba being added to this offense around DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Your fallout for the rookie and the veterans around him.
Yeah, he was an exciting player heading into this draft. I was hoping the Packers might nab him in the first round, but they don't take, as you mentioned, receivers in the first round. Right. I believe I broke it out to, when he played with Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave, the games where all three of them played, he had the huge year, but those other two guys missed some games. So he ended up with tons and tons of yards in those games that they missed. But even when all three were healthy, I believe he outgained them or at least matched them in yardage. They were all about 900 something. I tweeted about it a while ago. So it did indicate that he is on that level and a really safe pick. So heading into Seattle, this isn't a great landing spot for him. We talked about it on draft night with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf there. It's a decent landing spot from a quarterback standpoint. Geno Smith was pretty good last year. From a fantasy standpoint, I don't know that he's going to have any kind of breakout year. I might have him ranked in the 40s or 50s just on talent, but how many targets is he going to see alongside Lockett and DK Metcalf? Because the guys that they had last year combined for, let me see here, Marquise Goodwin, Dwayne Eskridge, Laquan Treadwell, the next three guys after Lockett and Metcalf combined for a total of 65 targets. So what sort of role are they going to carve out for him? How much is it going to negatively impact Metcalf and or Lockett?
And I know some people are in a hurry to bury Tyler Lockett, as they are every year. But remember, over the last two seasons, Tyler Lockett has 12 top 5 finishes among wide receivers to DK Metcalf's 4. This is why perennially, universally, annually, Lockett is actually the better selection for best ball leagues because he arguably has a higher ceiling and always goes 2 to 4 rounds later because of Metcalf's salivating size and profile. Moving on to the AFC, the Ravens continue to emphasize this offense around their offseason. Not only finally bringing Lamar Jackson back for that $250 million contract, but also emphasizing Todd Monken's pro-ready offense after he left Georgia for Baltimore this offseason, and add Zay Flowers in the first round to go along with Odell Beckham, Nelson Aguilar, who forget was signed there as well. And not to mention Rashad Bateman, who, yes, we've lost a little bit of sight given his injuries the last 2 years, but is certainly still there. So Zay Flowers for you in this mix.
Yeah, I mean, this is tough to get excited about. Yeah, tough to get excited about this one too with Baltimore. They tend to be run heavy with Lamar Jackson, although they do have, I believe, a new OC this year who might change things up and maybe get him back to his high efficiency passing ways from a few years ago. You want to see him with the 30+ touchdowns like he did. It was a second year starting or whatever it was. But how many fantasy receivers can the Ravens support? You've got Mark Andrews, who's going to get his share, we know. And then Rashad Bateman coming off of the injury. We've added Beckham, as you mentioned. And now we're adding Zay Flowers, who did fare well. I think it fared pretty well. Yeah, he was the third highest ranked rookie receiver over at reception perception. So a good route runner. So would be able to take advantage of opportunities. However, how many opportunities will he get as the second or third receiver? Probably third or fourth option in the passing game if you throw Mark Andrews in there. So that's the concern, I think, with the Ravens offense is how much more pass heavy can they go, and will that support 3 or 4 fantasy receivers?
The Bills. Oh, actually, before moving on to the Bills, I do want to mention the Ravens didn't draft a running back at all. So here is J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards still sitting here in whatever timeshare we basically had them projected before. So any thoughts on J.K. Dobbins, since he's the one getting hammered in Best Ball Mania 4 right now?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty good news for both of them that they didn't go running back. I know Latavius Murray got signed by the Bills, I think, so that takes him off the table, the annual Latavius Murray signing. But maybe he'll be available later in the season. But yeah, I think Dobbins, now a year removed from the knee injury, is going to be a little bit more appealing. If Edwards he's also a year removed from his knee injury, he's been really effective runner for them and has been a thorn in the side of Dobbins whenever he's been healthy. So it's a similar timeshare, and they don't neither one of them catch passes. They just don't use the running backs, or haven't used the running backs in the passing game in Baltimore. So it's tough to get too excited about either one of them, but I think Dobbins, proved last year he he could rush for 600 or 60 to 100 yards in a game and probably have a touchdown if the Baltimore offense is rolling. But he's just not going to do much in the passing game.
We spent the last 2 months figuring out Buffalo's slot receiver, only to see them in the first round leap the Cowboys at number 26, and the Bills move from 27 to 25 overall to grab Dalton Kincaid. And that's important because that tells you that, one, although I do have it on good authority, it was not Dalton Kincaid, the pick at number 26. They thought the Cowboys could take Kincaid. And that also tells you they have a plan in place for him and covered him that highly after he led this year's class at tight end with 2.5 yards per route run last year and has been deployed on 55% of his career snaps from the slot. So how do you see Kincaid fitting into this offense around Dawson Knox in year one?
Yeah, I mean, I would pose that question to you. Do you see them going to a lot of 2 tight end formations here to get both of these players on the field alongside Diggs and probably Gabe Davis? Because if that's the case, then you can kind of see Knox and Kincaid be maybe not fantasy starters, but at least be in the streaming conversation and maybe poke their head up every other week with a touchdown here and there and be able to make a fantasy impact that way. I don't feel like either one of them holds top 10 value right now, just given the way that they deployed their tight ends last year, although that things will probably change with Kincaid in full. What do you think?
I agree. I think Kincaid is also a detriment not only to Knox, but to Khalil Shakur. And also, it continues to emphasize what the Bills are shouting from the rooftops and no one's listening, that they do not want Josh Allen to run as much this year. Not only did McDermott say it pre-combine, Josh Allen mentioned it post-combine when he was interviewed, and everyone just thinks, that tells you that when push comes to shove, Allen will still run, no big deal. But dude, Travis Kelce talked about this on the Kelce podcast. Mahomes concertedly no longer runs inside the 5-yard line. They don't let him. They took that away from his upside because when he broke his kneecap, that showed them when they barely switched into the playoffs that year, that showed them that without Mahomes, they're still just a regular offense. They need that guy. And the Bills now see without Allen, after he dealt with that PCL injury throughout the year in the second half of the season last season, without Allen, the Bills are just a regular offense who don't scare anyone. They need Josh Allen. So whenever Damien Harris's market opens up as the league leader in rushing touchdowns, I'm going to jump on it. And I also think Kincaid is so important for an offense that recorded the 4th most pass attempts against 2 ice safeties last year as defenses continue to figure out how to limit them. Kincaid adds that important value underneath in the intermediate level of the field. So yeah, I do think he has value as a fringe tight end 1, and him and Knox cannibalize each other, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think if you look at the Buffalo offense and you assume that they're going to run Allen less, that should mean one of 2 things or both. More pass attempts, so that's good for Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, the tight ends, etc. Or more rush attempts by the running backs. And I think you alluded to the upside now of a Damien Harris. If they stop calling Allen's number as a rusher at the goal line, then those touchdowns will go likely to Harris, possibly to James Cook, but more likely to Harris.
For the Bengals, Chase Brown was added on day 3 in the 5th round. I do think he is a terrific value in the early 3rd round of rookie drafts. But really what this tells you as a workhorse even at Illinois, what this tells you is that Joe Mixon is still here. And this roster has Mixon, Chris Evans, Chase Brown now, and Travion Williams. So I think what we're really trying to get at, Paulson, is figuring out what the hell is Mixon's role, and he's now basically a big winner of draft weekend.
Yeah, because Samaje Perine has moved on, and you're looking at Mixon as a 3-down back. This is the kind of a weird offseason for Mixon because he's fantasy wise has been an RB1 now for several years, and it seemed like with whatever was going on off the field, he got into some trouble. I don't know whether that all stands. Cincinnati doesn't seem like the type of organization to really part ways with people when they get into trouble. They don't seem to be too worried about the off the field stuff. So Mixon's still here, and with Perine moved on, they're going to have to replace him. They do have some guys that can catch passes that are behind Mixon. I mean, Mixon is not a very good pass blocker, but he can catch catch passes, and they have used him pretty extensively over the last couple of years as a receiver. So I feel pretty good about him as a low end RB1 at this point, and we'll be keeping our ear to the ground to see if anybody's pushing him for time. But none of these guys have done that in the past, so it's only been Pirine that's successfully taken Mixon off the field.
And you mentioned Mixon as a low-end RB1, but he is currently going an underdog in the 6th round as the RB24. So if you think you can get value on that right now, jump into those Best Ball Mania drafts as we speak.
Now, let me ask you, what is the reason for that at this point? I get it at the start, of the offseason where maybe it sounds like he might get cut, but Pirine moves on. He's still on the roster. And and then now the draft is come and gone, and he's still going RB24. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it?
I agree with you. I think it's the same scared tendency with Dalvin Cook, though, and that we continue to hear the rumors, much more so actually for Cook, that this team is definitely getting off of him. We just don't know when and to who, if not an outright release. And so I think that's what everyone still fears in Mixon, is that they're just left holding the bag if he's just cut outright. But again, I don't know if this roster. I don't know if this roster lets you cut him outright. Like, they didn't pick up a free agent; they just added a 5th round running back, and I like Chase Brown. And now for Dynasty, I think his position's good. But that doesn't mean that Mixon is suddenly going to go away and then it's all Chase Brown. That doesn't make sense either.
Yeah, is the best free agent out there Leonard Fournette still? Is he the?
Yeah, Jarrett McKinnon re-signed with the Chiefs, which was pretty big news given that in age 31, he was the RB1 overall the last 5 weeks of the season. Leonard Fournette is probably the biggest name, unless you want to say Zeke, because Zeke, for whatever we think of him, will take touchdowns away from somebody.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if either one of those guys potentially land in Cincinnati. That would certainly change things.
The Browns, with that number 42 overall pick, they sent to the Jets, or they sent for Elijah Moore to the Jets, basically got both Moore and Cedric Tillman to play in wide receiver 3 sets. We already mentioned Tillman, last year's teammate with Jalin Hyatt, got injured 3 games into the year. Comps as DeAndre Hopkins is a guy who never really added yak per reception, yak after the catch in college, but still 6'3", 200 pounds, a possession guy who just falls but will catch the ball. And so now, Paulson, not only do we think the Browns are going to play more 3-wide sets, which jumped last year from 68% with Jacoby Brissett to 76% with Deshaun Watson in his last few starts, but also Nick Chubb, after a running back did not get added by the Browns in this class. Remember, Nick Chubb from 3-wide sets averaged 7 yards per carry in 2022. So a little bit to discuss here, but let's start with Chubb, who I think we have, and I agree with you, as a top 5 running back right now.
Yeah, and I was really confused by the Chubb ADP for a long part of the spring or whatever late winter that we've been dealing with here, but he's at RB6 now, and that makes a lot more sense. I probably had him at RB3, I think, in the never too early rankings. With Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson gone, I know they like Jerome Ford, but I don't see Chubb coming off the field a whole lot given this backfield, unless we hear unless we hear Ford is just tearing it up and they want to put him in that Kareem Hunt role or something, right? So Chubb should be going top 5, currently going RB6. And then, the addition of Tillman, the guy that makes me wonder about is Donovan Peoples-Jones, because, he started to show, some flashes with Deshaun Watson and could benefit from Watson's arm. So I'm interested to see where Elijah Moore and Tillman, the pecking order there, because we know Amari Cooper is the number 1 receiver, but how many snaps do these other guys get? And then who are the 3 that are out there in 3 receiver sets? I don't know that Tillman is necessarily, you could pencil him in, over Moore and Peoples-Jones. I think right now I got him at wide receiver 4 on that depth chart.
What are you doing with Watson in particular? Because right now in Underdog, he's going as the QB9 overall, which means everyone's assuming he's good at professional football again. I'm not writing him off as a whole, but remember last year with 6 yards per attempt, less than that, it was bad. It was terrible. So just how are you, like, where are you falling and taking a chance on Watson right now?
So this is one of those where, he had it he got thrown into the fire in the middle of last year. I'm not making any excuses for this guy. He did this all to himself, but as a player, I think it would be tough to just start your season in the middle of the season after taking the complete year off the previous year. And I'm sure timing is off and he's got to get all that back. And I don't think he suddenly forgot how to throw the football. I'm not like thinking, oh, he's going to be top 5. Like I sort of thought he would come back in and have a really strong finish to the year last year, but it just didn't happen. So he's going ahead of Dak Prescott, which I don't understand that. He's going ahead of Tua, which I understand because of Tua's health issues. Then you get into the Daniel Jones, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Jones or Aaron Rodgers tier of, Jones is intriguing. I think I probably would take him over Watson. But I would have Watson a few spots lower than this just due to what we saw last year. And I also would have Geno Smith a lot higher. He's at QB 16. I don't know why he's going so late. So I don't think I would have Watson in my top 12 right now based on what we saw last year. He does have a pretty good set of weapons. I think things could work out for him, just not super optimistic after last year. I do think that there is a chance, though, that he's not completely washed or anything like that.
I was so excited to talk about Jaxon Smith-Njigba for the Seahawks that, as our friend Football is Fun mentions in the chat, I forgot to mention Zach Charbonnet. And that's really important, actually, because I don't know if you know, Paulson, but Charbonnet is a super prospect. Like, this dude was not only Jim Harbaugh's #1 recruit on offense in 2019, he also led Michigan in a Power 5 conference, right? He led Michigan in rushing as a true freshman. This dude's good. But then when he was thrown into a timeshare inexplicably, because that's what coaches do, in 2020, he entered the transfer portal and left to play under Chip Kelly his last 2 years as a workhorse, 136 rushing yards per game and more catches per game than Jahmyr Gibbs, who we've already touted highly. So we should be excited about Charbonnet in a second round being added to the Seahawks offense. The issue, of course, is that Ken Walker, also drafted in the second round, was added last year. So your thoughts on this early timeshare? Pete Carroll has already mentioned Charbonnet being added in the passing game and the receiving game, and I believe that, given that Walker was a dud last year in that aspect. But your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe you could comment on the. Oh, by the way, congratulations on your mock draft victory. I wanted to mention that
the hill has been climbed finally
over at the Herc 2023 Herc Score Champion. Our very own John Daigle, by the way, just calling everything left and right that crazy night of the draft on Thursday night.
Thank you.
This was a weird pick. Maybe you could comment on the real world, the poor use of draft capital in the real world NFL. Yeah. But they love to run the ball. They've loved to run the ball there for years. And Walker, his ADP has taken a hit. I see that he's already going RB 13. I believe he was top 10 prior to this draft pick. So I think people are worried about it, and they probably should be. Basically what it does is it takes him off the field. If he were ever to get any third down snaps or receptions, probably takes him out of that role completely. And he's probably going to lose some of his early round stuff as well. Maybe you just see, I think in the years past, they've used 2 or 3, sometimes 3 backs on a weekly basis. But I think we probably just get down to either Walker or Charbonnet on the field if both are healthy. I just don't think Walker's ceiling is as high now given Charbonnet's presence. And I don't know that, I think Charbonnet as a receiver can get there in PPR formats, but is he going to see 10, 12 touches? That's not enough to be a fantasy starter, but he might be a flex play and one of these guys that could really explode if Walker were to get injured.
I used 25 carries as a qualifier. So think about that. Think about how many running backs, how easy it is over a 17-game season to reach 25 carries. And Ken Walker is 10th in stuff rate, which means he gets tackled at or behind the line of scrimmage. Walker was literally bottom 10 overall. That's how bad he was. That's how hit or miss, I should say, he was, because he is a home run hitter. But if not, he's basically providing nothing in the running game. And so just that aspect, and Charbonnet already being confirmed to mix in the receiving game, that tells you that Charbonnet can probably earn more of a role, which is why I do think he should be in that 112 mix, 201 mix in rookie drafts. And for best ball, certainly added, because we think this offense is going to be really amazing, honestly, with finally that third option with JSN and the passing game as well.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that Charbonnet is a better prospect than Walker? Like 3-year time span? Yeah.
I do. All around, yes. Their strengths probably vary, but I do think Charbonnet is the better all-around player, yes.
Do you think it's possible that he wins the job outright?
Considering they still mixed in, and it was only sprinkling, but they mixed in DJ Dallas, Travis Homer at times for some big reception roles. I don't think there really is such thing outside of 3-4 guys as a 3-down running back anymore. But I think Charbonnet, like spot starts, will be a top 5 player for us in our rankings, and that's really all that matters to me. And best ball and dynasty, certainly.
Yeah, he's going like RB 31, I think. Yep, over at Underdog. So good upside there.
For the Broncos, getting back to the AFC, adding Marvin Mims at wide receiver, which probably was reactionary, honestly, given that they tried to trade Cortland Sutton to no avail. They last second picked up Jerry Jeudy's 5th-year option because they had no other players and wanted to make sure they padded for Tim Patrick's return from last year's torn ACL. Nonetheless, Mims of explosive. 19.5 yards per catch for his career. 19 of his 20 career touchdowns came from targets 20 yards downfield. Basically just a walking explosive play ready to happen from the boundary. And I know it didn't look good last year. It didn't look good previously under Lincoln Riley. But remember, we already mentioned USC coach Lincoln Riley misused Jordan freaking Addison in his final year. So as much as Riley is an offensive guru, still absolutely prone to rotational roles and just errors at time. No big deal. Mims of explosive is my point, Paulson. So your thoughts on the Broncos receivers, knowing that the first pick of the entire Peyton era was someone to throw into this mix?
Yeah, this was an interesting one. And you look at this is another guy, talented guy who's landing on a depth chart that already has the top 2 spots pretty locked up. Tim Patrick is actually a pretty good receiver, number 3 receiver, although I would think Mims would be able to win that role with Patrick kind of coming back from injury. So as you mentioned, deep threat, but he also did really well on slants. So that's another aspect of his game that he's pretty good at. Matt Harmon compared him to T.Y. Hilton and John Brown. So those are pretty, and I know how much Harmon likes those players. So those are pretty good. That's a pretty good comparison for him. I think the question is, what sort of target volume will he see when Jeudy and Sutton are both healthy? Now, he's a player that, and I do like doing this sometimes. If you can pick a third receiver, you have injury attrition upside with 2 different players. Because if Jeudy goes down, which he's had some injury issues, Sutton's had some injury issues. Now all of a sudden you have Mims potentially in a starting role, and you're getting that upside out of him. That's not a bad play. I just if all 3 are healthy, I don't know how much target volume he's going to get, and given that he's mostly a deep threat, it's probably going to be very spotty. I think that's worthwhile in best ball. And as I mentioned, if Jeudy or Cortland Sutton get traded or there's an injury, he could see quite a bit of upside there in the later rounds.
The Texans finally have a vision, a direction with CJ Stroud going number 2 overall. Where they really flunked and messed this draft up was trading back up into a draft that everyone considered one of the most poor in talent in the last decade. Trading number 12 pick they had, number 34 overall, and then a 1st and 2nd next year, giving that to Arizona, who's going to have, I would guess, 2 of the top 3 picks of the 2024 draft as they reset and become a juggernaut as early as 2024, but trading back up for number 3. For fantasy, though, number 2, CJ Stroud, A grade. That pick alone, amazing. Your thoughts now on CJ Stroud and this jumble of wide receivers who they have prioritized to run block or be role players as 5'8", 160-pound Tank Dell arrives as well.
Yeah, he's a good route runner. Tank Dell, Nathaniel Tank Dell. So he's got, he could be, he has a role that he could play. I don't, he's not going to turn into a fantasy wide receiver 1 or anything like that. But Nico Collins probably is the safest player in this receiving core.
Yeah.
Robert Woods is known, he's more known for his run blocking at this point. Didn't have a very good year last year in Tennessee. He was great with the Rams, but that seems like ages ago. Noah Brown, John Mechie coming back from injury, Steven Sims, Amari Rogers. These are the top.
Listen
6 or
to
7
these guys.
players.
You're mentioning.
Yeah. So what I'm underlining, and the one guy that is good at his position is Dalton Schultz. So that's good. That's good for CJ Stroud. What I'm getting at is that this is not going to be a great passing attack. Most of the target, I think Schultz will probably lead the team in targets. And then it's just going to be spread out amongst these other guys. And I don't think that Stroud or this passing game will support more than one fantasy starter, possibly 2. But I'm not confident about that. I don't think that Tank Dell is that guy. He might be a 4 for 40 type guy. 4 catches for 40 yards and, be able to maybe put up 10 points in a PPR formats on a weekly basis or a semi-weekly basis. But I think Nico Collins is probably your best bet of this receiver group. But I'm not super he'll probably be ranked as a wide receiver 4, just given the nature of this passing attack.
And for rookie drafts, super flex in particular, I do have CJ Stroud 1 spot over Bryce Young, if only because Young averaged 1.4 rushing yards per game for his career at Alabama as an elite pocket passer, whereas at least last year, it wasn't much, yes, but Stroud, 6 carries for 60 yards against Northwestern. I was at that game, actually. And more importantly, against Georgia, college football championship, all the chips are down. You have to do everything to win. 12 carries for 34 yards. I think we got some sneaky rushing upside with Stroud, and so that's why I have him ranked for fantasy over Bryce Young. Someone, though, I have ranked over all of them is none other than Anthony Richardson. And I know I told you, Paulson, before the draft, I was very adamant, thinking that Richardson, even as a top 5 pick, potentially landing with the Seahawks whenever we first talked, I thought he at least was going to get reps in practice, and whomever the bridge quarterback was in that organization would start at least half a season, Gardner Minshew included, over Richardson. But now I want to take a step back and admit to you I think I was wrong, because post-combine presser, Shane Steichen said, and I quote, "I think the development of players comes with more experience. I think when you play more, that's how you develop. Practice reps, game reps, I think that's how you develop." And what that tells me, Paulson, is that they're going to let Anthony Richardson fly. And it may not be good, but they're going to let his reps get out of the way. And if we can get a top 5 season from Justin Fields in fantasy points per game last year with the worst receiving core of the entire NFL and a league low in pass attempts per game, that tells me for this year, redraft, best ball, rookie drafts, I don't care about Anthony Richardson's passing game. Let it develop. I care about the most athletic quarterback in combine history being allowed to start 17 games. And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and just getting back to Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, my rookie quarterback model does have Bryce Young for a couple more yards per game than Stroud. So that would be an interesting bet.
It's close. I have them literally neck and neck, 1 spot away from each other.
I just when you mentioned that, I pulled up my spreadsheet just to see what they, and that also brings me to Richardson, 29.2 rushing yards per game expected. And that actually feels a little bit light. It's interesting looking at some of these other players, Malik Willis, Sam Howell had projected for more based on what they did in college. Some of those guys rushed for 800 yards. I believe Richardson 654 yards as a starter last year, 9 touchdowns. So he definitely has that rushing floor. Maybe they run him a little bit more, looking and design runs like they did with Justin Fields in Chicago last year. So certainly if he's going, I left draft night thinking that he was going to sit the first few games based on your take on that. But it does, I think the owner, Jahmyr Gibbs, said something about him. He's going to start, use this type of draft capital, just get him out there. As long as you can, he's not behind a really, really bad offensive line and is getting shell shocked. Then it's probably better for him to be out there playing as opposed to riding the bench.
I'm very excited about Richardson, who is my 102 in rookie drafts as the overall QB1. I think one of the bigger elephant in the room offseason conversations is going to be what to do with Travis Etienne. That's why I want to get your thoughts on it, because the Jaguars added Tank Bigsby from Auburn at the end of the third round. So day 2 capital. And I don't necessarily think he'll be an impact single-handedly, where we can start him or flex him in redraft leagues this year. But to average 15.5 carries per game in the SEC for his career, lead Auburn also in rushing in every season since 2020, and also have a career 15.4% target share with special teams experience. See, he was a punt returner as a freshman. I think that tells you that this dude's not only going to be active every week, but he can do a lot of different things that chip away at Etienne's role. After Doug Peterson, remember, pre-combine presser said, we want to get more running backs involved here to keep Etienne healthy. So your thoughts on Etienne post-draft?
Yeah, I think this is they went into the draft with Jermichael Hasty, and a player that I believe to be very underrated, and that I was interested to see if he perhaps was the RB2, is Dearness Johnson. He does really well on all these high yards after contact, number of rushing attempts per broken tackle type metrics. Dearness Johnson does. And whenever he's had the opportunity to be the RB1 or be in a pretty healthy RB2 role for Cleveland, has done really well. So he was the player that heading into the draft, I was wondering, he might leapfrog Hasty and perhaps be that bigger RB2 type guide behind Etienne, where they're kind of splitting the touches in the backfield. But now that Bigsby's in the fold, that kind of throws that, makes me wonder about that plan for the Jaguars. I thought that was a sneaky signing to get Johnson. And now they have Bigsby. So they have, they added Johnson, now they added Bigsby. It does appear that they want to lighten Etienne's load. And the fact that he was seeing so many touches down the stretch last year was the main reason that he was such a good fantasy asset. So you're looking at him now as more of a pass catcher, maybe seeing 10 carries plus 4 or 5 catches, as opposed to, pushing 20 touches per game, given the talent behind him now.
And where do you have him currently ranked? Because I see in Best Ball Mania, he is going as the RB12 overall, basically the low-end RB1 of the group.
I think that's about where I would have him, maybe a little bit lower if he's going to be in a timeshare, because those top 10 or 12 spots are, it's not quite that many that are in a 3-down role, but if you get into a pretty healthy timeshare, it's tough to crack the top 10.
I am excited about the Chiefs' day 2 wide receiver, Rashee Rice, who not only worked out with Patrick Mahomes in Dallas before the draft at my friend's gym, shout out Apex, but also averaged an FBS high 113 receiving yards per game over the last 2 years as the focal point of SMU's offense. And at 6'1", 204, so prototypical, big size we want. Not only that, but in 2021, a route from 94% of his snaps from the boundary, and its last year, 83% from the slot. I'm sorry, 2021, 94% from the slot, 83% from the boundary in his final year. That tells you he has the experience all over, and he's not one of these Mickey Mouse receivers like Kadarius Toney or Sky Moore. That's going to make my mentions burn, I know. But I am very excited about Rice in the early second of rookie drafts. I think he really can carve out a role here. Your thoughts on the Chiefs receivers?
This is going to be an interesting test case, especially for Harmon's reception perception relative to how this receiving room is going to shake out, because he was very high on Sky Moore. Sky Moore did not do much at all last year. Wasn't able really to get much on the field much. But very good route runner, top 3 or 4 in last year's class. Rashee Rice, of the 14 guys that Harmon charted, was dead last in his route running success rates. So, but on the other hand, very productive receiver in the real world. So sometimes it doesn't matter, if the route running is perfect, if he can get it done. Harmon commented, and I put it in the article, that there's just too much unorganized chaos in his game right now. So I'm very interested to see if it's Rice or if it's Sky Moore, or if it's whoever it is that emerges as the number 2 or number 3 option there, because you're looking at Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who is not a true number 1, but we know he's going to be on the field a lot due to his speed and his history of production and what they paid him. Kadarius Toney, who has upside, but is kind of a mess as a route runner as well. And then you got Moore, and then you're adding Rice, and he was a 2nd-round pick, so there's quite a bit of draft capital. So go ahead.
Remember, they re-signed Justin Watson after Watson ran significantly more routes than both Tony and Sky Moore at the end of the year.
And wasn't all that productive in him. He had a couple games,
not at
but
all.
yeah. So it's like, who's going to get on the field and who's going to be productive and who's Mahomes going to target. So this is really a good test case, I think, when we look at, okay, quality of route running, history of college production, et cetera. How do these guys vie for routes with Patrick Mahomes and one of the best passing attacks in the league? We know Travis Kelce is going to bring Travis Kelce, but this receiver room is, in its depth chart, is totally up for grabs, and we could see anybody with the most targets in this room by the end of the year. I wouldn't feel good about betting on anyone in this. It depends on the odds in terms of who's going to see the most targets.
Those tiers you heard at 204 were Evan Silva's from Chicago, as Michael Mayer's slide finally ended with the Raiders, who traded up, jumped from 38 to get him. And what we know about Mayer is, one, he outsnapped former first-round pick Tommy Tremble, if you recall, under Matt Rule as a 19-year-old freshman in 2020. But also, Mayer does all the right things. He can run block. He's really a 3-down option if they allow him to be. And more importantly, Paulson, in this situation, they don't have a choice but to let him be a 3-down option unless Austin Hooper somehow outplays him. So your thoughts on Michael Mayer, who, even as a rookie tight end, I think will lead these tight ends in catches in year one.
This is an interesting group of rookie tight ends. And we didn't even talk about, during the Detroit blur, we didn't talk about Laporta, who might start for the Lions, or should start for the Lions. We love
Sam Laporta. Yes, we do.
657 yards in his final 2 years at Iowa, another Iowa product. Just shout out to Laporta. I am so anti-rookie tight ends in general in the rankings, because it's very rare that they live up to their ADP, although their ADP tends to be depressed because they don't tend to do much as rookies. Now, there's the occasional exception, and I think Mayer is one of those potential exceptions. I probably will have him ranked in the 18 to 24 range as a potential TE2 and be in the streaming conversation. You just wonder. Number one, we got Jimmy G at quarterback, so that's changing. They have Devontae Adams as the clear number one receiver. And they added Jacoby Myers, who's another target hog. So how many targets are really available for Mayer? Hunter Renfro's there as well. So that's number one. He does have the talent, I think, to succeed and to be Austin Hooper is a pretty solid tight end, but they'll probably want to get Mayer on the field as long as he doesn't fall on his face in the summer. If he's a 3-down tight end, then he'll certainly have a better chance than if he's rotating with Hooper.
For the Chargers, they did end up adding Quentin Johnston, a wide receiver overall, at 121 pick, number 21 overall on Thursday. And at 6'3", 208, I know everyone's initial reaction, like Chase Claypool and maybe even Kellen Moore and the Chargers thinking that this guy will give us that deep threat. But I will tell you, that's not who Quentin Johnston is. And if they use him like that, that's a disaster, because 102 receivers had 100-plus targets in the Power 5 last year, and it was Quentin Johnston who recorded the 11th fewest contested catches, only 9 out of all of them. What you really try to do is get him targets underneath, because he's averaged a career 7.7 yak per reception. He is Brandon Ayuk, but big with armor on. That's who Johnston is. And so what are you doing with these 3 wide receivers now locked in place for 2022 between Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Johnston?
Yeah, 6'3", 208, 4.57 speed. Good burst score over at Player Profiler. Biggest comparable is Josh Dotson. I don't know if that's a good thing, but athletically, that's how he compares. Mm-hmm. This is another one of those first-round receivers that is landing in a tough spot. Keenan Allen soaks up targets. Mike Williams soaks up targets. He should be the third receiver there ahead of Palmer, given the draft capital they used on him. There is a chance that that he could have some good fantasy weeks. I don't know that he's going to be a trustworthy, a pick in the top 9 rounds or 10 rounds, given the fact that he's going to be the third option. Gerald Everett's still on the roster as well. We kind of thought that he'd be cut or they would move on from him. So there are some tight end targets that are not up for grabs. We kind of thought they might be up for grabs if Everett moved on, but he hasn't. So you just kind of see him. You just think about what Palmer gave you last year. If Keenan Allen is dinged up, Mike Williams is dinged up, and I think that's the one key thing to remember is both of those guys do have a long injury history. Then Johnston will be a fantasy starter. You could draft him with that in mind, but I think starting the season, if all 3 players are healthy, you're not going to be able to count on him for fantasy starter type numbers.
The Dolphins went 1-2 against Buffalo last year by a total margin of 4 points. Just lost by total 4 points. That tells you they can compete with Buffalo this year and possibly win this division. Josh Allen still being the X factor, despite this Dolphins roster being amazing. But on draft night, there were 2 clips on Thursday and Friday for Miami. One was Mike McDaniel sitting there, not reacting at all. That reaction was due to Cam Smith being drafted first. Cam Smith had first-round grades at cornerback, but now we'll get a chance to develop behind Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey. Good pick, but it didn't excite McDaniel. The clip, Paulson, you should be aware of is McDaniel literally pumping his fist because Devon freaking Achane from the Texas A&M Aggies was drafted as well at 321 overall. And what he was excited about is that at 188 pounds, being an All-American track athlete in college, Devon Achane ran a 4.3 240. And now you mix that with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, and even Elijah Higgins, who was a 95th percentile speed athlete, got drafted as a wide receiver, but they're going to move to tight end. All this offense is doing is just adding more speed. And given his size and the fact that he was a workhorse in his final year, had to wait behind Isaiah Spiller until last year. But when Spiller got drafted by the Chargers last season, Achane then averaged 19.7 carries and 4.9 targets per game in the SEC. Bell cow volume. And now we add that to the Dolphins offense. So this Dolphins backfield, what the hell are you doing with it?
Well, they re-signed Raheem Mostert, who has 4.42 speed or something. He's much bigger. He's 200 and something pounds. I think that the one problem with Achane is that he's 188 pounds and 5'9", but he's got 4.3 speed. So there's certainly a role available for a player like that. I don't think he's going to be the RB1 in Miami. They're not going to use him to that extent. I don't think he'd hold up. So I guess the question is, does he take over the Jeff Wilson role? And then you've got Mostert and Achane as the 2 primary backs. And, Achane is more of a kind of the pass catcher and, gimmick type guy, for lack of a better term. Or how do you see this shaking out with Wilson and Mostert back? It just seems to me like Wilson is probably the most expendable because Mostert does have that great speed. He's got the long history with Mike McDaniel. I mean, Wilson does too, but it seemed like when both were healthy, Mostert was the RB1, and now they're adding this kind of this wild card in this backfield.
And it's a good wild card too. That's why I continue to want to, in the later rounds, grab Achane above all. Like, yes, Jeff Wilson may still soak up the most opportunities inside the 10-yard line, but Achane just isn't speed. Like even at 188, as you mentioned, he's still strength. Like he forced a missed tackle on 29% of his career carries since 2020, again, against SEC competition. That's huge. So no, I think this dude is ready, honestly. I consider him a early second, if not 201 overall rookie draft pick. And yeah, I want a piece of him in this offense. I think he's going to get, I would guess mix in for, I don't want to hyperbolize it, 8 to 10 carries early on, but can he end up out carrying every game Wilson and Mostert towards the back half of the year? I think so.
Very interesting. And then also we know that Mostert misses some games here and there. So what happens when that happens is probably Achane with Wilson, sharing I think they want to keep guys fresh and rotate guys. So I mean that makes this a good system for Miami, but it doesn't help us as fantasy managers to try to figure out who's gonna start.
The Patriots got terrific value. Traded back twice only to get who was the second highest ranked cornerback on most people's boards, Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon. Also grabbed Keon White, who had some first-round grades early in the process in the second round. And I think those two players add tremendous value in year one for them. Beyond that, though, you got to start downgrading them for drafting a center, Jake Andrews from Troy in the fourth round. Dane Brugler had a last-round grade on Jake Andrews. Also spending any amount of capital, let alone a fourth-rounder, and a kicker and a punter, because, of course, they're the Patriots. But more importantly, Paulson, for our purposes, they didn't add a running back. Like, to come away with 12 picks and not have a running back in any of those selections is wild. And that tells us that Ramondre Stevenson should be a high-valued pick this year.
Yeah, and they didn't add a receiver until, was it the fourth round?
I would argue they still didn't add a receiver. Yeah.
Sixth round.
Kayshon Boutte, yeah.
Boutte, yeah, and then Demario Douglas in the sixth round as well. So this offense is going to be interesting for a few reasons. One, they didn't really have an offensive coordinator last year. Now Bill O'Brien's in, so that should be an upgrade in terms of at least having somebody that understands offense, running the offense. But certainly Ramondre Stevenson comes out of this looking good. They did add James Robinson. Was it via trade or free agency? I can't remember, but he's on the roster now. And then, of course, at receiver, they added Juju Smith-Schuster, losing Jacoby Myers. So Ramondre looks like, it's hard to call anybody in the Patriot backfield a bell cow, but this is about as close, to a bell cow as they'll get. He's a good pass catcher as well. Robinson will sprinkle in. I don't think that they'll necessarily use too many other people in this backfield if both those players are healthy, unless somebody's able to beat out Robinson for the backup role. And then at receiver, just to talk about it right now, it's very much a shrug emoji trying to figure out, other than Juju Smith-Schuster, who's going to be the number two, in this receiver room for targets. So Devontae Parker, typically when healthy, is a target earner. They drafted Tyquan Thornton very early last year. He had a good first game and then kind of disappeared. Kendrick Bourne, they don't seem to like him, but he's kind of a gamer. And then they got the two rookies that they drafted along with a bunch of other dudes. And then they added Mike Gesicki at tight end. So that's just something to remember when you're looking at this. Jonnu Smith's gone. They've got Mike Gesicki and Hunter Henry now at tight end. So a couple decent pass catching tight ends. So I think from Stevenson's standpoint, he's top 12, very talented guy, and looks like he's going to see the vast majority of the touches in this backfield.
And finally, the Titans. No major splashes, but they at least restored my faith in the league and allowing Will Levis to slide to the second round and then basically get in for free. A pick swap, also eating a third rounder. But anytime you can do that for a quarterback who at least had some, albeit few, first-round grades, you take that chance. It's okay, despite what I think about Levis as a pro player. And then Tyjae Spears in the day 2 third round as well. But remember, Spears now one ACL reportedly, per NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, and dealing with knee arthritis. Pro Football Doc, as he mentioned, not expected to have a long-term career, may do something year one, but not someone we want to draft, honestly. I hope he has a good career. But overall, what that tells us, Paulson, is that you look around in this depth chart post-draft, and it's still Treylon Burks and Chig Okonkwo, and that's it.
Yeah, and in the backfield, Derrick Henry is still there. I don't see, if he's healthy, I don't see his workload declining too much. Maybe a little bit if they want to use this rookie. Hassan Haskins is on the roster as well. He 25 carries for 93 yards last year, so nothing special. Maybe that's what they were trying to address, that backup role with that pick. And the passing game, the receiver room, they drafted Colton Dowell at some point. But Treylon Burks, Nick Westbrook, Kyle Phillips, who did have some buzz in training camp last year, never got it going. Racey McMath, Chris Moore, Reggie Roberson. This is rough. So Burks should see a lot. Okonkwo should see a lot. you got to like them at their respective positions as volume target hogs. We do wonder, though, are they going to throw the ball anymore, or is this just going to be the same old Titans offense where it's all centered around Derrick Henry, even after an offseason where there've been rumors that they might trade him? It just hasn't come to fruition.
And it's the same thing for the Patriots. Like, we talk about the receivers, but it's still Mac Jones. So really, how much does it matter? For the Titans, what is happening with Ryan Tannehill, given that he has the league's largest cap hit under center this year, which is crazy to think about, but literally that's what it is. We know, well, we don't know, but reportedly, I've heard some little birdies that Tannehill was in trade packages to the Cardinals, but it was for CJ Stroud, so it didn't matter in the end, and the Titans backed out when Stroud went to number 2 overall. So this team knows Tannehill may be a bridge, but he's not the option. That's the whole point of trading up for Will Levis. So if it is Levis now throwing to these guys, you then have to ask as well, how much does that matter? But at least we know, to your point, Okonkwo led all tight ends in yards per route run last year, and that was as a part-time player. Now we move Austin Hooper away. We have basically negligent receiver competition, and Okonkwo being a full-time player, that's where I get excited. Even Burks, I'm debating on, but Okonkwo, I can get there easily as a tight end 1. Easily.
Yeah, and you're just looking at Okonkwo for sure because of the position. So you just look at this depth chart, and it's just like Burks and Okonkwo and Henry.
Don't look at the depth chart, actually. Don't do that if you're listening at home.
It's gross, but they got one guy at each position. Henry, Burks, and Okonkwo. They're going to see the vast majority of touches, targets at this year. It's rough.
That is 40 minutes on every conference for everyone. I think that's pretty good, given all that happened in one show. Paulson, what do you have on the site for everyone post-draft?
18 impact rookies drafted outside the first round of the 2023 draft. Some of these, I put great opportunity grades for everybody. If you want to see what I think, some of them are better than others. For example, Jayden Reed's got an A. And then I also have nine impact rookies from the first round of the NFL draft. And now I'm retreating for the next week or two to get these 2023 projections up, so we have stuff we could talk about for the next few months.
We have player profiles for free on the site. We have best ball content coming up, including for myself on the site. But for the time being, if you're still trying to relax and take in and understand what happened over the weekend, my mock grades are there, as well as my individual player profiles, round 1, 2, and 3, that you can see for fantasy purposes, amongst all the work there. Also, if you want to see what the nation's most accurate mock draft looks like, that's available on the site free too. So, Paulson, until then, next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, we'll see you then. And remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. Next time.